Mark 5 is where we're going to be this morning. We're continuing our series, Atomic Habits, and we're looking at just the patterns of Jesus. As we look to God embodied in the flesh a couple thousand years ago as he walked the earth, what were some of the rhythms of his life that just specifically the author Mark wrote about? So there are 4 gospel narratives that capture the life of Jesus. Mark is one of them. And each of them have their own reason for writing. They have their own reason, they have their own way of writing, kind of the literature that they do. Some have different emphasis, some actually also cross over and tell a similar story. But the goal wasn't for all 4 to be identical, but it was actually to understand the life of Jesus through the lens of Mark. And what he was wanting us I don't think he intended this, but 2,000 years later, we're still reading what Mark wrote about Jesus. And so we want to take that on. What did Mark have to say about the life of Jesus? And today, we're going to talk about healing. That's fun, huh? No controversy in that subject at all, right? Christians for thousands of years, and maybe even more as we actually move further and further from Jesus here on earth, we hear the word of healing, and we probably think a lot of different things. You might think about like a Benny Hinn on a stage and people falling down and jackets flying and different things like that. You might think about really just far-off stories and far-off places that don't actually really mean anything or interact with our lives today. You might think about maybe those who go a little bit further and do like the snakes on the stage and they use the snake oil to heal people. Anybody? No? Seen like the documentary on the whole snake church thing? Okay, so that's real. It's out there. You want to know if you're going to a snake church or not, but it happens. And sometimes people die. True story. So there's just a lot of things to this. And whether you're coming from a church or an unchurched background, it's a big topic. And I think it's oftentimes also a misunderstood topic. It's hard to grasp. But I don't think the goal is to fully understand it, like many things in faith. Tim Gettert spoke last Sunday, and he talked about a few things, but one thing he mentioned is that the people that were following Jesus, like over and over and over again, they kept like messing it up. And they kept like getting it wrong and not really understanding. And Jesus would say something, and they're like, wait, hold on. And he's like, do you guys not get this yet? Like, do you not understand? Like the things I've been showing you and telling you, you really don't get it yet. And I think that's actually similar to our story. But it's an invitation to continue to journey, to be open, to explore, to have new experiences, to actually step into a life that does say God is so much bigger than me and the way I understand him and the world and other people. So God, may you actually break into that. And one thing that connects to healing, I think, is also the question that we all have to do something with, the question of, if God is a good God, then why do bad things happen? If God is a good God, why is there war? Why is there tragedy? Why is there loss of life? Why is there cancer? Why? And we keep going and going and going. You just continue to work through. If God was good, why are all of these things happening? And we all have to kind of figure out how we're going to go about that. And depending on worldview, depending on faith, depending on the religious tradition that you find yourself in, everyone's going to have a little bit of a different answer. And what we're going to do now is actually look at to what I think some of the answer is in and through Jesus. So again, I'm going to read decently long. I'm breaking the rules of what I'm not supposed to do. But I'm going to trust that this is what we are to do this Sunday. So let's jump into the story. This comes right after a moment that Jesus just calmed a storm. Like they were on a boat and this big storm's happening and they're all freaking out and he's pretty calm and he gets up and he like literally calms the waves and the winds. And what's starting to happen is people are starting to recognize like this guy's something else. We're not too sure what's going on here. We think we have these ideas, but we're not really sure. They're starting to ask these deeper questions of who's this Jesus guy that we've been interacting with. And it picks up and it says, they went across the lake to the region of Gerasene. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the evil spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and he told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. A few questions in there. We don't see this terribly often walking down the street, right? Just the fact that there's like pigs on the side of a hill, that alone. There's a lot there. It's a heavy, heavy story. It doesn't stop. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with them. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, "Don't be afraid, just believe." And we'll stop there for now. You can see why this is a controversial topic. For a long time, we've looked at the life of Jesus, and we see that he heals people. And then we start to make delineations. Well, that's Jesus because he is God, and he can do those things, right? But then there's these moments in the text where Jesus does this thing over and over again. And he's doing this stuff, and he's healing people, and people that are blind are now being able to see, and he's bringing life to things that were dead. And then he has these people around him, like the apostles and others, and he said, "Hey, now you guys go do this. You go do the same thing that I've been doing. Go into the city, go to people's homes, go cast out demons, go pray for the sick, go preach that the good news of my kingdom is here." And what he's doing over and over again is Jesus is really showing us that his kingdom is breaking in new ways that are beyond the rationale of what we can understand in a lot of ways. And then he invites us to do the same thing. This struggling group of people who doesn't have it figured out by any means and continues to wrestle with, like, what's even going on here? You even heard the disciples in that one moment as Jesus calls out to the crowd and he says, "Someone touched my coat, will you come forward?" And they're like, "Whoa, hey, there's a bunch of people here. What are you thinking trying to, like, you can't just point someone. How'd you know they touched you, right?" Like, they're still just like dumbfounded by everything that's going on. Just want to point out a couple things here. One, I don't know if you heard, but there was two similar patterns within this story. Both the demon-possessed man and the woman who was bleeding. They both fell at the feet of Jesus. They both came and fell on their knees, asking for healing. Now, a part of that is if I think about a couple thousand years ago, and Jesus is doing these healings and walking around and healing people, how much does he have to subject himself and his power into life to be like, hey guys, look, I can heal. Hey, I need you to see that I can heal. Hey, I need you guys to understand that this is what I'm doing, that I'm healing all things. Or was it that he kind of started doing things because he would also do some stuff and then he would tell people to be quiet? Why is that? But then little by little, people would come to the feet of Jesus and cry out for him to a point of falling down at his feet and begging for healing. And there's two things that didn't settle well with me this week. One, am I willing in front of a crowd to go and fall at the feet of Jesus? Am I willing to put so much faith in what God can do that I can just risk everything around me? And two, am I desperate enough to realize that I actually need him to heal? That I actually need him to do something in my life that only he can do. And do what he said that he's come to do. To set the oppressed free. To heal the blind. To usher in his kingdom in a new way that we can't even perceive everything. Do I even have that passion? Do I have that amount of faith? And I'm not going to a place to say that you need to have enough faith for Jesus to heal. That is a common teaching, I think. But why is Mark pointing to faith? Why, and even in Jairus, who leaves his family to come to Jesus, he falls at the feet of Jesus. We see a demon-possessed man, we see a sick woman, and then we see a religious leader, someone who probably socially had his life more put together. And yet he comes and falls at the feet of Jesus in front of people. See, Jesus didn't heal everybody. I want to say that now, because I don't think everyone's supposed to be healed. That's not the point. Everyone can get healed, and I'll get to that in a second. But I wonder if crying out for healing is a way in which we grow in dependence on God. I wonder if our faith growing, that everything in our life, the hurts, the pains, the struggles, all that's going on, Jesus is saying simply, come and lay at my feet. Come and cry out for healing. Come and believe that I can make things new in your life. So I wonder if it's less about healing and more about our dependence. Yet there still is something to say that these people come to Jesus in faith for healing, and he heals. There's something there. I don't know if it's all of it, though. So there's one thing. In our lives right now, if you were just to pause and think, if you were to think about the places of pain in your life, the places of brokenness, the struggles that you have, the things that you're wrestling with, right? Even in these first two stories, we take someone like a demon-possessed man. He literally has things going on inside of him that he does not want. I wonder what things inside of you this morning are the things that you do not want, the things that you wrestle with. And then physically, as a woman comes to him with 12 years of bleeding, who's been essentially would have been outcast of society, who would have been unclean. Like, what are the physical things going on in your life that you would want Jesus to heal? An interesting twist, and I'm going to focus, it's used in both of these stories, actually all three, but with the woman that comes to him from bleeding, he heals her, so right, she touches, his power comes out, she is healed. Physically, she is healed. She is no longer bleeding, okay? And then he calls her out, and he says, hey, someone touched me, who was that? And then he has this next conversation with her as she comes forward and she lays at his feet. While Jesus was still speaking, he says this, he said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Now, I think many of us in this room, whether we believe that there could be some physical act of healing or that God can intercede in our life in a way that relational, that emotional, that the physical healing can happen, I would go as far to say that I'm sure most of us believe in socioeconomic restructuring. That we believe that to see God's healing on earth, to see shalom break in, means that we see justice, and we see all people being moved to a leveling of ethnic and racial and socioeconomic status. And that is right, and that is true, and that is good. What's interesting in this piece is that this is the word sozo. When it talks about the healing of this woman, when it talks about the healing of the demon-possessed man, and when it talks about eventually the young girl, the girl that was raised to life. So she's healed physically. The Greek word is different. He heals her. She stops bleeding. And then he tells her to go in peace. And when he says this next space, it's sozo, which is the same word that we use for salvation, which would be a religious or a church term for the saving of our souls. That we can actually be in life with God both now and beyond. That we can find saving in God's grace and his mercy. So what's happening is if we can believe that there is a God who I think many of us in this room have put our faith in to say, Jesus, save me. I look at you as my Lord and my Savior and my King. I believe that there is a kingdom where one day heaven will be on earth and that all things will be made new. I believe all of these things. So if we believe all of that, which I think might be even a farther stretch, can God do a little bit of healing right now in this moment? Could a glimpse of that far-off kingdom that one day will be here, can a glimpse of that come through someone's faith in praying for healing? I think sometimes we make healing as like this greatest ultimate thing, but I think it's actually more that we don't know what to do with it and it's uncomfortable, but we can put our faith in a God who once is going to make all things new and save. Sozo is the same thing that he's doing now that he will one day do. And he connects the larger story of what God is up to in our world. And then he goes to this woman and he says, go in peace. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Why did he call the woman out after she's already been healed if healing was the goal? If that she came to him for physical healing. If that was the goal, for every person to be physically healed, why didn't she just go away? Why didn't he just let her go? Like, oh, cool, one more person got healed. I didn't have to do anything. I don't know. He just lets her go. But he calls her out. He says, go in peace. And what he's saying there is he's grabbing a Hebrew word called shalom. And this is shalom, if you can imagine the garden in the original creation where all things are right and perfect and good and beautiful. And he says, go in shalom. I want people to see that you have been healed. That you, someone who cannot be married anymore if she was or hadn't been yet, someone who is unclean to be married, someone who is unclean to actually be touched by any other person, someone who is unclean and would be pushed out to the edge of society. He actually grabs her and brings her in so everyone can see, and then he can actually restructure the way in which people view her in this world. See, I think for when we care about justice and righteousness and all things being right and made new, Jesus is saying yes to all of it, and here is one more way in which this happens. Here is one more way in which my healing and my shalom is being brought here on earth. Because healing is not the end goal. What he does is he actually restores someone's dignity through this healing. Someone who had no self-worth. Someone who, again, was on the margins of society. See, healing becomes a much larger picture of God's kingdom, not just this fun little cool tool that we can kind of learn, and some people do more than others and can kind of become a power thing and a look at me, and there's a lot of that. But I think the opposite side is that we don't actually do any of this at all. That we don't actually pray for healing. That we don't actually pray for our own healing. We don't actually pray for on the behalf of other people to be healed. As we see in Jairus, he comes to Jesus in faith to heal for somebody else, not even himself. See, in this, I think that faith plays a way that we have to believe that Jesus is going to heal, but then we also know, Jesus, help me in my unbelief. So you can have the smallest amount of faith, enough to come to Jesus, to cry out, to say, God, I need you to do things that I cannot do. I need you to do things that I love, my counselors and my therapies and all the things that I'm doing, yet I still need Jesus to break into those things. We do a lot of emotional health work. I still need Jesus to rewrite the narratives of my past and the brokenness that I have. Right? We can do a lot of different work. I can go to the doctor, and Mark even gets after the doctors. The doctors did everything they could. And after so many years and so many resources, she still was not healed. Luke, who wrote another section of Scripture, actually was a doctor. So he's not like totally just dishing doctors, but he's saying God has so much more. Can we come to him? Do we have faith to come to the feet of Jesus when we want healing? When we see the brokenness in our own lives and the lives around us? Do we actually understand that a glimpse of healing is part of a larger story that God has invited us into? That there's so much more that God is setting right through the miraculous, the works that he is doing. And do we believe that miracles in and of themselves are not just for the sake of miracles, but that so society, that people, that all things can be put in its right order, where every single person has worth and dignity and value? And so my biggest question this morning is, am I willing to take a risk in faith to pray for healing? Am I willing to do that for myself? Am I willing to do that on the behalf of other people? This isn't the only place we see this in Scripture. But here's where we get hung up. Well, again, that was a long time ago. Well, maybe that was just for the 12 people around him. Well, maybe that was for the 72 people that he also sent out. But then we get to a book like Acts, who Luke was the doctor. And he writes this whole thing of so many things that go down. And he says here in Acts, a lot of people are gathered. This whole weird thing happens where like the earth shakes and tongues of fire come down and people who speak different languages can understand each other. This big charismatic or Pentecostal scene, if you can imagine it. This whole thing goes down. And everyone's confused of what's going on. Why can we understand each other? Why did God's Spirit just fall in this way and now these weird things are happening? And Peter stands up, the one who never got it right, one of them, and he said, in the last days, God says, I will pour out my Spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my Spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will show wonders in the heavens above and signs on the earth below. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Salvation, healing, deliverance, sozo. What he just did is he said that the same Spirit that fell on Jesus at his baptism is the same Spirit that we have now, which means the same Spirit that Jesus had access to operate, to heal, to deliver, to cast out, all the different things that he did is the same Spirit that we have. One story, and then we're going to practice, because I probably can't just convince you of all these things. So I was down in El Centro in Mexicali 4 weeks ago or so, and I was traveling back up. I got dropped off in San Diego to spend a night with my brother who lives down there, and then was going to keep making my way back up to Fresno. And he was working during the day. I got dropped off at like 12 or whatever, so I go and find a little restaurant at the San Diego Zoo to go hang out for a little bit, grab a drink, do some reading. And I go in and I order, and the woman that originally served me just like stood out to me for some reason. There was like 4 or 5 people working, and she was smiling, she was happy, she was very, very encouraging. Like there was just like a gentleness about her. And so whatever, order my thing, and I'm sitting there and I'm just reading, and then again, like God like prompts me to like, what was it about her? I started to ask these questions. I couldn't read. I was really trying to finish a book that I needed to finish, and I just kept thinking about like, why did she stand out? So I paused, I put my book down, and I sat there for a minute. I was like, God, why did she stand out? Why is this? And I had a couple things come to mind. One was that she has a daughter, and then along with that came kind of like it was just a thought more than anything that didn't feel like my own thought, and it was, what if I told you everything was going to be okay? That's it. I don't know what to do with that, right? So I sit there for a while. She, refills, and, we hang out for a second. And then she comes back a third time, and it's probably the worst way to start this. I go, hey, can I ask you something really weird? And I'm sure, like, I don't. Then I'm thinking, I wasn't even thinking about the other side of that, of how like restaurants and servers just have people like talk to them about random. Like, anyway, so I'm like, hey, can I just do something weird? She's like, yeah, come on, bring it on. I'm like, okay. Well, here's the deal. I'm just sitting here, and I barely know you, but as I was watching you interact with people, and even when you interacted with me, sat here for a second and just asked why you stood out to me. And do you have? So first of all, I'm gonna ask you a question. This is very weird again. Do you have a daughter? And she goes, or no, do you have kids? And she says, yes. I'm like, okay, good. One thing. Do you have a daughter? And she goes, no. I'm like, frick, okay, the whole thing's blown up. Why did God, like, okay, this is dumb. I'm out. I'm not going to do this. And she goes, but I have a son. I'm like, okay, that's kind of halfway there. Like, I'm 50% chance here, right? Okay, I'll keep going. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, maybe I narrowed in on the, boy or girl too quick. Let me try this one. This is where it gets really weird. This is what I told her. I said, this is where it gets really weird. And she goes like, oh, this is already kind of weird, so it's okay. And I go, what if I just told you the words right now that everything's going to be okay? And like instantly just tears. Like her eyes fill up, tears start rolling down her cheeks. And she sits there for, I don't know, an awkward 30 seconds of like not even knowing like what to do with that. And I said, hey, clearly like that meant something to you. What is that? She's like, well, my son is with my husband right now, and because of work, he spends more time with him, and my husband's just been drinking a lot, and I'm really worried about my son. And she's just sitting there, just again in tears and this overwhelm, and I'm like, okay, well, so again, this was a super weird experience. Like, what do you think might be happening here? And she's like, well, I think that God's telling me that everything's going to be okay, that I can trust this. And then I put my pastor hat on real quick, and I was like, well, boundaries matter also. And so, we kind of talked for a second. Like, there might be something that, you still need to do here. But then we chatted for another second, and ultimately I just landed on like, so what do you think God was saying to you this morning through that? Like, hey, we got that. Like, you can trust and you can be okay. And she says that God sees me and God loves me. And then I never actually, and then like literally it was like that short interaction. And then my next thing was be like, hey, can I pray for you today? And then I didn't see her again, so I didn't get to like do the whole thing. But I was reminded of that story this week because I know we can read these stories and they feel so big. I don't know the last time I hung out with like a demon-possessed dude and like pigs around where I could like say, like, it's just, these are massive stories. But I tell you that story because I think it's honestly that simple. That God is asking us to notice what's happening in our lives and what's happening in the lives of others. He's actually asking us to slow down and ask the questions of God, how are you bringing about healing right now in this moment? How are you wanting to bring about healing in my life? How are you wanting to bring about healing in other people's lives, in society, things at large? And I wonder if we just ask that question more. Don't worry about what you have to do or don't need to do. Sometimes I don't try and break it all down. I got to know this piece to know this piece. I think God's kingdom is simply trying to break in and give us glimpses of his beauty and his goodness and all things that are right. And he's invited us to say, God, heal. May you heal. God, come. May your presence and your power heal, which means I need to be asking, God, may your presence and your power fill me. As I walk around, may it be your presence and your power that is literally just like changing the atmosphere around me, the way I interact with other people, and I start to notice things differently. And I think for some of us, and I have these feelings of comfortability often where I'm like, I don't know what are my needs, what are the brokenness, blah, 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 and these kind of things. And I think sometimes what that means is I need to be in touch with people that have pain in their life. And I think God is drawing us. When we have comfort, we give that away. When we need comfort, we ask for it, and it goes back and it goes forth. And so I think some of us, the prayer this morning is, can I be like Jairus? Can I be someone who knows the pain of someone else to be able to invite God into that process for healing? We need to get a clock on the wall up there. Oh, shoot. This happens. See, this is what happens. No notes, no nothing. Just, okay. So we're going to do this. We're going to practice really quick. Nothing too crazy. It might be extremely crazy to you, actually. But I just want to read this scripture a few times. Ish, you want to come up and just strum a little bit. And I just want us to have our eyes closed, and I'm going to read the story of the woman who was healed. And we're going to read through it a few times, and there's going to be some silence, and you're going to reflect. And all I want to allow space for here is for God to speak to you. For God to speak to you of maybe where you're crying out for healing. Physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally. I mean, you work through this. Whatever that looks like. Let God, don't predetermine what that is. Let God highlight that. And in one of the readings, I'm also going to ask, like, as you imagine yourself here, there's Jesus, and the woman makes her way through the crowd. The disciples are probably close to him because they're able to talk to him about, like, what are you doing? And there's a big crowd around. Like, where are you? I want you to actually try and imagine yourself there for a second. Who are you? Are you the woman? Are you one of the disciples, kind of watching it and not sure what's going on, but you're drawn to it, but you want to question? Are you the crowd who's like, what is going on right now? Are you the people that actually then receive her healed and start to see the new dignity in her life? Right? So there's a number of people, of actors that you can be in this. So as I read it the first time, maybe pick that. Maybe pick, where do you sit right now? What's the location? How dirty is the ground? Are there buildings around? There's a hillside just before that. There's a lake close. The breeze, and you can smell kind of like all the different things. Just take it all in. And then we'll be in silence for a little bit. I'll prompt a question, I'll read again. We'll be in silence, I'll prompt a question, we'll read again. And then the courageous parts comes, and when I'm going to ask, if anything specifically came to you, whether for yourself or for someone else, then I'm going to ask you to stand. And then, because I talk too long, we'll kind of do like a shortened version of prayer, where I'm going to ask some other people to come up and pray with you. And this is a participate if you'd like. This is not pressured. I think you're even just participating by being in the room. And then we'll stand and sing a song together. Is that cool? Okay. So why don't we close our eyes? Do your best just to pause. Might mean taking a couple breaths. Noticing how your feet are intact with the ground. Maybe there's a posture of having your hands open. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, who touched me?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." I'm going to read again, and this time, now that you kind of have the setting, you see yourself in it the best you possibly can. I just want you to allow God to highlight. Are you the one asking for healing this morning? Or are you asking on the behalf of somebody? And if so, who might that be? A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered. "And yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." I'm going to read one more time, and after this, I'll ask anyone to stand. And you'll be standing in two responses. One, is this for you? And two, is this for someone else? A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." So if you would like prayer this morning for yourself or on behalf of, why don't you go ahead and stand up? We'll narrow in on what that is when we have some people come around you. Just take a moment. Whether it be prayer for yourself or prayer from someone else, go ahead and stand up if you would like prayer this morning. Yes, come, Holy Spirit. Just one more time. If God highlighted any healing in you or any healing in someone else, and you'd like to receive prayer, go ahead and stand. Good. Thank you all for standing. So now what we want to do is for any of us who feel comfortable, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 6 people standing. If we can probably get at least 2 to 3 people for each one. And I just want to preface this. The healing is not in your words. The healing is not in the pressure to feel like you have to say the right things or do the right thing. Healing is in the power and presence of Jesus. And it's in his mercy and his goodness that healing comes from. So the good news and the bad news is you can't get in the way of it. But what you get to do is participate in it. So if you feel comfortable and you would like to, I'm going to ask you here in a second to stand, walk over to whoever you feel led to pray for. And when 1, 2, or 3 of you get there, you simply just ask, what can we pray for? And give the person who's standing just a moment to share. And then just take a second and be like, okay, God, how do you want me to pray? And then just say the words that God puts on your heart. It can be 3 words, 9 words, 15 words, but may it be in the name of Jesus, in the power and presence of Jesus. And so, God, we ask you to move. Yeah, we ask you to honor the faith, to come at your feet and ask for healing. So those that are ready to stand up and pray, why don't you go ahead and do so. We're going to let the strumming go for a minute, and then we're going to enter into a time of singing together. So go ahead. Let's go ahead and pray.